Hi guys, welcome. Hope you're all having a great day. Thank you so much for turning in the solving by factoring and the solving by square root property. Today we're going to start the notes on solving quadratics by quadratic formula. This is the only method that works 100% of the time. So if you don't know how to solve a problem, always come back to quadratic formula. We're going to separate this list up into 3 different units. So today you're going to be doing just basic how do I do quadratic formula and solving. Next day, we're going to do how do I solve it when there's a GCF. And then the third day, we're going to do how do I solve it when I get a negative under the root. So out of these 5 problems, they hit each one of those. Every day we'll do about 2 problems, and those will correspond to problems on the worksheet as well. If you have any questions, as always, come see me at Zoom or email me. Let's get started. So quadratic formula, the most important thing to know in order to solve this would be this following thing. So quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. You will have to memorize that equation, but that's the equation we use every single time. Couple things I'll see people mess up is that the negative b, so it's the opposite of what b is. And when you square root the b, make sure that you put that number in parentheses because your calculators will change the form that you have going on there. So let's get started. So today what we're going to do is we are going to do problems 1 and 4. Very, very basic, straightforward quadratic formula and solving from there. So let's get started. So when I look at number 1, when I look at number 1, I have x squared plus 5x minus 7 equals 0. In order to do quadratic formula, just like with factoring, one side of the equation has to be 0. If it's 0, then you can get started. The first thing you want to do is you want to identify your a, your b, and your c, just like we did in all the other forms. So our a here is 1, our b here is 5, and our c here is negative 7. Once you've done that, you plug it into the equation. The equation is negative b, so negative 5, plus or minus the square root of 5 squared, so it's exactly what b is, okay, minus 4, a is 1, and c is negative 7. All over 2 times a. Okay? And that's what x equals. So your final answer is going to be where the graph crosses the x-axis. Okay, so our x-intercepts, just like it was with factoring, just like it was with square root property. What I suggest you do next is you simplify underneath the square root sign. That tends to be where the biggest errors are made. So when I do that, I end up with negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. And then that's a negative 4 minus 4, negative 4. So when I type in the calculator, I do negative 4 times 1 times negative 7. And that's going to give me a plus 28. So really pay attention to those negatives here, because a lot of times people will leave that at negative 28, and your answer is going to be totally different. So be aware of that, okay? So then what I do after that is I'm going to continue to simplify down under my radical, make my life easier. So I get negative 5 plus or minus the square root of, and then I add 25 plus 28, because I want to simplify that down, and I get 53 over 2. Okay? And then what I can do is separate that up into 2 different problems. So I get negative 5 plus the square root of 53 over 2. And I get negative 5 minus the square root of 53 over 2. Now when I type that in my calculator, I need to make sure I do the numerator, then I do the denominator. So I'm going to do negative 5 plus the square root of 53, and I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm dividing that answer by 2. And I end up with approximately 1.14. And then my other one, I do negative 5 minus the square root of 53, enter, divide by 2, and I get negative 6.14. And those would be my answers. Okay? So I would be done with that one. And I would do x equals or x is approximate. I use the approximate sign because it's not exactly equal to those numbers. I rounded them. But perfectly fine if you do equals there. I will not count off. Okay? So that's our first quadratic formula. Let's do one more. Okay? So let me erase what I have here. Going through, making sure we're good. And I'm going to go over here and erase this really quick. And we're going to do number 4, just to make sure we're good to go with things, okay? So let's look at number 4. So what's different between number 4 and number 1 is that number 4, one side of the equation doesn't equal 0. So I have to do that first. So when I do that, I get x squared minus 15 minus 35. So negative 15 minus 35 equals negative 50. So I get negative x squared minus 50 equals 0. Okay? One side of the equation has to equal 0 first before I can do quadratic formula. And then I'm going to find a is going to be 1, b here is going to be 0. Just like with factoring, it's okay for b and c to be 0, but it's not okay for a to be 0. So that same rule applies. So I find my a, b, and c, and I go straight into plugging it into quadratic formula. So I end up with x equals negative b, so negative 0. Doesn't really matter the sign on 0. Plus or minus the square root of 0 squared. Again, I'm putting that in parentheses. Minus 4a negative 50c, right? All over, and this is what sometimes people will forget, is that they will forget to put this whole thing under 2a. So the whole thing's divided by 2a, not just parts of it, okay? So the whole thing is divided by 2a's. Then once I get to that, I'm going to simplify under the radical first. So I get x equals negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 0. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 50 is positive 200 all over 2. Okay? And then from there I keep going. So I'm going to simplify that down again, and I end up with x equals negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 200 over 2. And then just like before when I was solving this, I'm going to separate this up into 2 parts because on all the other ones I've gotten 2 answers and this is no different. So x equals negative 0 plus 200 over 2 and x equals negative 0 minus 200 over 2. I'm going to type that in my calculator. The 0 doesn't really matter, so really it's just a square root of 200 divided by 2. But make sure I do the square root of 200 first and then divide that decimal by 2, because if not, you're going to get a different answer. So x is approximately here 7.07. And then this one over here, when I do the same thing, x is approximately negative 7.07. And I'm done. Those would be both of my answers for quadratic formula when a was 1, b is 0, and c is negative 50. Okay? Please try to mimic some of those problems on your homework. If I was going to do problems for this work today, I would suggest that you do number 1. I would suggest you do number 4. I would suggest 5 and number 9. Those problems right there will correspond to the problems we just talked over. Okay? If you have any questions, hope to see you on Zoom and have a fantastic day. Thanks for stopping by.